Okay, we are live on YouTube. All right, we'll go ahead and begin. So far, we have 18 participants on Zoom, and we have a few people watching on YouTube, and I'm sure more will join. Hi, Krishna. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining Vaishnava Academy in our third seminar in our parent education series. My name is Sri Radhika Devi Dasi, and I'm one of the organizers of Vaishnava Academy. We're very glad that we have about 250 registrants, so we're assuming a lot more people are going to be joining as the time goes on. From around the world, so from India to Canada, the United States to Europe to, we even have people registered from Australia, where I believe it's 3 a.m. right now. So we have some very enthusiastic participants. Thank you for your enthusiasm to participate in this webinar. It's my great honor and privilege to introduce our special presenter, Aruddha Mataji, today. It's almost like words fail me when I have to introduce someone who means so much to me personally, and who has changed the trajectory of my life. So I wrote things down because I knew I wouldn't be able to do it without that. Aruddha Mataji is a disciple of Gopal Krishna Maharaj, and of course she's well known within the entire ISKCON community as a homeschooling pioneer. Prabhupada always said that the quality of a tree can be judged from its fruit, and she has given the world of ISKCON and the world at large two amazing fruits of her educational methods, which have been based on the Srimad Bhagavatam. She mentors thousands of parents across the globe in how to make Bhagavatam an inseparable part of their children's lives. And she has written Homeschooling Krishna's Children, where she's documented her educational methods. But then her second publishing project is a monumental task. I mean, imagine going through Prabhupada's Bhagavatam and pablumizing it and making it available for young readers. It's a 19-volume study guide for young readers that she's in the middle of preparing, and she's on the 4th canto right now. So there is nobody more qualified than her to present a webinar on how to make Bhagavatam accessible to children, how to study it every day with the children. And I now turn the stage over to you, Mataji. Thank you so much for sparing this time for us. So you are right now muted. Okay, there.
Thank you, Radhika, for this very, very generous, warm welcome. I'm very happy to be here with all of you devotees, and really excited to share this, this importance of reading Bhagavatam, studying Bhagavatam with our children. This seminar will be divided into 3 parts. The first part talks about the spiritual benefits of studying Bhagavatam with our children. The second part will be the academic benefits. And the third part will be a practical workshop of methodology of how we actually can do it. And throughout the whole seminar, I will be presenting to you a lot of examples of practical examples of what I went through with many, many children at different levels, at different age groups. And in the end, after the seminar, I will open up for questions to all of you. And I always also will share resources that we have developed as a team for all of you. So without further delay, I'm going to begin this seminar. So I like to start out with these beautiful quotes by Srila Prabhupada. Actually, Srila Prabhupada wanted our children to study English and Sanskrit just so they could read his books. As we know, Prabhupada went through a lot of struggle and austerity just to give us these books, that which was the heart of his mission. And we know that with great austerity, he translated the first canto at the Radha Damodar temple, brought these books, trunk full of books on the ship, how he was even trying to distribute these books on the ship, and the struggles that he went through when he first came to America. And at that time, but because he had the faith that this book, this Srimad Bhagavatam, could actually revolutionize this whole society, this misdirected civilization. He wanted not only the adults to study his book carefully, actually these quotes will show that how he actually wanted the children to also study these books very carefully. Three of the things that was very dear to Srila Prabhupada, and that was, book distribution, as we know, and then deity worship and Gurukula. The reason why he was very keen on establishing Gurukulas is because just so the children could develop character through the study of his books. And because we know that, Krishna, so he would oftentimes say that how the world is so full of, crooked people without character, rascals, he would call them, because we see that we see that these people, they come also from very rich, wealthy, and educated families. So education in itself is not the key to developing good character, in making people gentlewomen and gentlemen. But Vedic education, he said, was very different because it's about Krishna. And since Krishna is the source of all qualities, so naturally when we learn about Krishna and his pure devotees, these qualities automatically develop in us. So in this way, Prabhupada said that Bhagavatam is like the ripened fruit of the Vedic tree. So, it's the essence of all the Vedic literatures. The Vedic literatures is immense. It's the entire Vedic tree. But until we get to the essence, the source of all knowledge, then what is the use of just studying the different parts and parcels, right? So, because he said that in order to study the part and parcel, we would have to go to the source. Just like, for example, he would give the example of a microphone. One time a reporter went to him and asked him where the Vedic literatures come from. And he gave the example of a microphone, how when we have a microphone that he had in front of him, he said, then we need some literature that comes along with it. And that literature is bona fide because it tells you how to operate, how to use that microphone. But if we were simply to know how it works, and if we were to break it into parts and see how it actually is put together, well, that would not be enough information. What we would need is to use the microphone for the purpose for which it is created, right? So this whole creation is not enough to learn about this creation, the physical laws of, how this creation works, and be mesmerized by that glamour. But unless we go to the source of everything, what is the use? What is the use of all that knowledge? So the Srimad Bhagavatam takes us to the source, and it rejects all the sub-religious principles, and it takes us to the very purest level. So in this way, Prabhupada stressed that we must teach the Srimad Bhagavatam to our children, but it naturally has to be presented in a way that is digestible for them. Let me read you this verses, these quotes by Srila Prabhupada. These 3 quotes by Srila Prabhupada is just among the very few of the hundreds of letters that he wrote, emphasizing that children study his books. Our students, specifically, they should take care of reading Srimad Bhagavatam. We have therefore prescribed in our school Dallas, and from the very beginning, if they begin education with Bhagavad Gita and then come to Srimad Bhagavatam and read the whole literature, then they will be more than MA, PhD. Even astronomy, astrology, politics, sociology, atomic theory, everything is there. Therefore, if we study Srimad Bhagavatam very carefully, then you get all knowledge completely. Throughout the whole world, whatever knowledge is there is in the Srimad Bhagavatam. If one simply reads Srimad Bhagavatam, his education is topmost. If one studies Srimad Bhagavatam, he is well versed in every subject matter. So Prabhupada's great desire was that children study Srimad Bhagavatam because it will equip them in every subject. And when they study Srimad Bhagavatam, it provides the foundation for studying all other subjects. In other words, then it becomes easier to teach our children any other academic subject they need to study. And so therefore, there's no harm in teaching them starting with Srimad Bhagavatam, because the entire philosophy of Bhagavad Gita is in the Srimad Bhagavatam and is presented in a way that becomes very easy for children in the form of stories. And it becomes easy for children to digest it. So there's very wonderful spiritual benefits from reading Srimad Bhagavatam. And one of the things, as we know, children they love to imitate. They love to, in fact, it is said that whichever role models that we put in front of our children in the first 5 years of their life, this is how they will come out to be. And so we have to give them good role models. We see in society today what kind of role models children look up to, right? Maybe athletes or film stars, and even good role models. Like sometimes you hear about some, good role models, but yet with time they fall from our eyes, because it is said that in this material world there's no pure goodness. Pure goodness is always is always tinged with passion and ignorance here, and therefore when they look up to role models, they very soon they become skeptical, and worse still, they try to imitate them with disastrous results. But Krishna conscious role models, they're very different, because Krishna is part of the picture. And especially role models in the Srimad Bhagavatam, they're naturally very, very ideal. And because these figures are absolute, and when we read about them, when the children read about them, it affects their heart. Their character rubs on them. And as they get older, they are able to appreciate the instructions. I want to give you some examples of what kind of character building one can actually imbibe through these study of these great personalities. And we know as there are many stories where the heroes are the children themselves. So when the children read about them, they actually are very much effective. For example, the story of Dhruv Maharaj, right? He's such a hero. He was only so young, but we hear from him the quality which went very, very deep as I was teaching children, the quality of gratefulness. Generally, I remember going to school and, and we went to a convent in India, and, there used to be a first class. It was called the moral science class. And we would learn about all the different qualities we are meant to develop, It was a Christian school, so they taught about the 10 Commandments and things like that. And, and so I remember reading about them, how to honor the different points of how to honor your, your father and mother, and loving our neighbor. But I remember that was one class we never took it seriously. It would just go in one ear and come out the other way. And because they never struck the heart so much. But when we were doing, like, for example, the Dhruv Maharaj story, the quality of gratefulness goes so deep, because his mother instructed him to the right path, not to be envious of his step mother, but rather to go to Krishna, to take her advice and go to Krishna. And this changed his life, basically. He changed his life. And later on, when he became a purified personality and he came back home, and he ruled the kingdom for 36,000 years, when the time came for him and the airplane came to take him back to Godhead, he remembered his mother and the incident that happened 36,000 years. And he refused to go up on the airplane until his mother was also with him. And of course, we know the story of how Nanda and Sunanda pointed out to this airplane that was already up in the sky with his mother in that airplane. So Prabhupada talks about this quality of gratefulness, how he never forgot his mother, even after 36,000 years. Now that really runs deep in the children, it really runs deep. And they can never forget this quality. And it's not just for their parents, but to everyone. This quality of gratefulness to all Vaishnavas is so important. It makes up for the good relationships. So in this way, they can understand. Then the quality of humility. For example, one other example would be the quality of humility in the story of Parikshit Maharaj. He was very, very humble because he took that curse, even though he was quite innocent. But yet he took the curse and he saw it as a plan of the Lord. For himself, there was no problem. He was willing to go through even give up his life, right? But when it came to exercising his kingly power to curb Kali, he was ruthless. He was ready to kill Kali. But yet we see the quality of tolerance of how he allowed Kali to actually stay in his kingdom. So again, we see these qualities so clearly: humility, tolerance, yet good management, of protecting his citizens. So this is a great quality of a great leadership in society. So if we hear these type of qualities, and of course the story of Prahlad, where it's amazing, where he tolerated all the torture of his father, but his father could not tolerate such a noble son who actually never did anything. So we see how in a devotee, these qualities are there, but yet anybody who's devoid of Krishna consciousness has practically no good qualities, right? So in this way, and then the higher for children, older children, we can go even deeper, where we can talk about more deeper qualities. Like, for example, I remember the story of Kaliya telling the children how, even though Kaliya was excused by the Lord, and due to the intervention of his wives, but yet Krishna, the way he behaved with Kaliya was just so exemplary. Instead of parting ways with him, where he's angry or making permanent enemies with Kaliya because of poisoning that river, he actually gave him a place. He gave him back being king of the snakes and told him to leave and go to Ramanaka Island, right? So we see many, many things. So we go deeper and we tell them, okay, well, see, we don't just hate our enemies. We don't just hate people who don't like us. The quality of compassion, all these things come so well in every story of the Bhagavatam. And these type of qualities, when children learn and imbibe, they make for a great person, right? Prabhupada said, this is what our mission is to create a whole generation of exemplary Vaishnavas. He said that if you lose even one Vaishnava, that is a great loss. And the way to make great Vaishnavas is to give them good character building. He said, what is the use of giving them everything materially, but yet they have no good qualities? It's like decorations, he said, on a dead body. And so this can be very well, very nicely done through this Srimad Bhagavatam. So next is academic benefits from reading Srimad Bhagavatam. So we all understand that the real reason why we're reading Srimad Bhagavatam with our children is because we want them to be good devotees, pure devotees, and go back to Godhead. But the amazing thing about the study of Srimad Bhagavatam, it gives benefits in areas which is very, very amazing, even in non-devotional areas. Forget about, being good devotees and being able to be intelligent and sharp and being able to go really, really deep into Bhagavatam and the Shastras. But it also, these abilities even resonate everywhere, in every part of their life. And we can see that as a practical example for those who've already been teaching Bhagavatam, how this intelligence that is developed by reading Srimad Bhagavatam, how it permeates in every area. And mainly what it does, the way it does, is gives them this strong reasoning and critical thinking skills. And these skills are what employers are looking for today, right? This is what education institutions are looking for. They're looking for people who can take a problem, critically think about it, find solutions, and then give their realizations on it. So these skills are clearly developed in Srimad Bhagavatam. When I talk to you about the methodology, I will explain to you how many skills such as communication skills and vocabulary can be done so effortlessly through Bhagavatam. As we know, in terms of vocabulary, there's so much, there's so much there, right? I remember teaching the children vocabulary through context. It's so difficult to learn vocabulary, if you just had words in front of us and then we look up in the dictionary. It's a cumbersome process. But if you learn it in context, then it becomes very, very easy. I remember big words. Children would guess the meaning, so effortlessly, and they would enjoy learning in this way. For example, there was a sentence called, "The whole place was drenched with rain." And I asked a child, "What does drenched mean?" And he says, "I think it means soaked." He had never heard of the word drenched. But learning through Srimad Bhagavatam becomes very, very effortless. So here I can give you the example of how we can develop these skills. Now, for example, I've been lately doing the story of Hiranyakashipu and Prahlad, in the 7th canto. And it's been very interesting because we've kind of gone through every facet of life. For example, just to understand and how to learn by contrast. For example, Hiranyakashipu is the greatest terrorist in the history has ever seen, right? I mean, he's everything, you name it. I mean, he's the biggest terrorist, he's the biggest tyrant, Mayavadi, and everything combined. And then Prahlad is like the greatest devotee. So here, while we can see the contrast and how a devotee, really is the hero of this whole story is Prahlad, because the theses, you can say, would be, Hiranyakashipu. No, it would be Prahlad. And the antithesis, you could say, would be Hiranyakashipu. And the synthesis would be Lord Nrsimhadev coming. You see, so in this way, we can put it together, right? Because the real subject of this story is Prahlad. He's the thesis, right? And the antithesis is his heavy father, his terrorist father, right? And who brings it all together is Lord Nrsimhadev, right? He's the synthesis. So in this way, by taking this contrast in that story, it becomes a very powerful experience for the children. And they're able to gain so many things out of it. Okay, this world may be full of self-serving leaders, but see how Prahlad, there's Prahlad there, how he was able to live even amongst such, demoniac association. It's like, how the tongue lives between the teeth, right? He was literally living like that. So it gives children the ability to actually face the world and see what it's like, because Prabhupada constantly talks about there's so many little Hiranyakashipus around, right? So it's not like the world is not, full of these people, right? It is there, but how does a devotee deal with it? Prahlad had a very tough situation because his own father was like that, and the fearlessness that he showed, and also his compassion, in dealing with the father who was so demoniac, was also very revealing, right? We learned about, ecology, for example, how because of the envy that Hiranyakashipu had for Lord Nrsimhadev, for Krishna, it was so intense, his envy towards him, that he, anything that pleased Krishna, he wanted to destroy. So we can explain to him how the source of all, problems is our envy to Krishna, of course, but also when people don't accept God or believe in God, then everything, we cannot really love each other. Because we see here, because of his envy of Vishnu, anybody who liked Vishnu, loved Vishnu, was his enemy. Because that envy permeates every area when we forget to love Krishna, when you don't love Krishna. So in this way, Hiranyakashipu was giving orders to kill the cows and the Brahmins and destroy everything, destroy all the mines, because after all, it was his kingdom. Why would he do that, right? Why would you want to destroy something that you're going to rule anyway? But that was because of his envy. So we can talk about that. And also we had a big discussion about, killing all the trees and how it is, how it can destroy the environment. So many things that can come from that, right? How, how the real Vedic culture used to be how there's trees everywhere, fruit trees, especially fruit trees, where people could, if they're hungry, they can just go and break a fruit. It used to be like that in India, but now you don't see fruit trees anywhere. And also in America, I went to Florida, and you would think Florida climate is really ideal for coconut. You can't find one coconut tree. And people, somebody told me that, it's because the government is afraid the coconut would fall on somebody's head. So, and that would create a problem, whatever. So this is what Hiranyakashipu was doing. So without, the children get the picture. Even if you don't create a feeling that today's world is demoniac, they still get the picture, isn't it? We don't have to demonize everything, but yet we have to accept reality. What is material life like? And they get the picture. They see, okay, well, this is how it is. And then they don't take anything so blindly. Then they accept material life for what it is. And it's a wonderful way of accepting material life and seeing what it's like through these stories, because it's all there. It's, Prabhupada used to say that, even though he spoke a lot on Krishna book, he wrote the Krishna book, yet in the entire Krishna book, you see so much references to the nature of this material world, because he understood that unless we understand the nature of this material world, how can we appreciate Krishna, And therefore, we should not be afraid of teaching our children the nature of this material world. But also, we're teaching them how to live in it in a way that can be pleasing to Krishna and also pleasing to us. We can make our own life very happy. So, so these things can be very, very well. And for little children, you can take, younger children, very, very younger children. I remember I would stop at places like, when Hiranyakashipu was shedding tears, and the tears were falling on Prahlad's face or head, and we talked about is this real love? What kind of love? Because he's ready to kill his son later. So we talked about real love and what real love is. Real love is when we love Krishna, then we can love his parts and parcels. Just like a father, only when we love our father and mother can we love each other as siblings, right? Without loving our parents, there's no meaning to our loving each other as children, right? So in this way, we understand that Hiranyakashipu's love was not pure because he didn't love the eternal Father. So how can he have real love? But we can have real love for each other. So simple things like that, we can explain to them and do that. And we can make things simple, or we can go deeper as we like. And I will show you later on the methodology by which you will know how to create this kind of environment where this kind of discussion becomes very, very powerful. Okay. So this is the methodology here, and this is, I would suggest that we read, parents can read the purports ahead of time. That is the ideal thing, if you have the time, because when we read the purports ahead of time, then we can make notes on the side, which will give us pointers of how to discuss what points, because it will just immediately remind us, oh, this is the part I want to go into. And it becomes very, very, we can go deeper because naturally we would read the puppets. But if you don't have time, it's okay, because we have enough life's experience where we can go into a discussion without, if you haven't read the puppets. So we sit in a circle, or if it's in a school, in a classroom, we have the children, we take turns reading the translations only. The reason why we don't read the puppets with the children is because it's it's difficult for them. It takes a long time, and they may get distracted or lose interest. Once in a while, I remember I would go to puppets, because when we were doing the discussion, we couldn't answer the questions. Some questions that would come up, we had no answer. And then we would go into the one or two puppets, and as you know, that experience, if you have a question, invariably you read a puppet and probably there is the answer, right? And the kids would be very, very excited. Wow, we found the answer. So in this way, they lead that discussion themselves. So the point is, I want to read to you some of the things I wrote regarding what we can do in terms of asking questions, or maybe I'll do that later. Yeah. So the benefits of good discussion. So it's very, very important because it makes children think and reason. And, it also, we can play devil's advocate. There's so many points in which we can play devil's advocate, right? And we hear that, Prabhupada's conversations are full of them. When he would take the morning walk, he would do this devil's advocate, this debate with the disciples. This is how he was training them. One disciple would become the materialist, and he would become the scientist, or or one would be the devotee, and they would discuss some topics and about science and scientific theories and so many other things, right? So discussion helps to open up their mind. It sharpens the intellect, and it's a very powerful process of teaching. In fact, the tutorial system of teaching has been very, very popular just only 50 years ago. And even now in some prestigious universities like Cambridge and Oxford, they still do it. And it's a very powerful process of not only just, how in school there's a teacher and the children are sitting and it's just basically a monologue. But in a tutorial system, there can be, there's back and forth, a lot of discussion. And this discussion can really sharpen the intellect. It can it helps in developing these critical thinking skills and reasoning, and good reasoning skills in the children. Okay, so I could give you some example. Yeah. I was thinking about the Jay and Vijay story, a quick example here. I was just doing that recently with some children, and believe me, these children are very young. I mean, they are like 6 years old and 7 years old. And we went quite deep into this story because it's an interesting story, where especially that chapter where the sages, they curse Jay and Vijay, right? So many things open up here. First of all, we discussed. We had two teams, not two teams, but we took individual opinions on whether they thought the sages were right or Jay Vijay was right. So some came with one answer, some came with the other answer. And then we went deeper into that. The Jay and Vijay, they were wrong in cursing them. I mean, in stopping them. After all, they had great eagerness to come. And the sages were, they should not have been angry, because after all, they were sages. And it didn't seem like their curse warranted the volume of their mistake. I mean, it didn't seem like it was balanced. And this way, we went back and forth and understanding. But of course, the sages were, they were innocent and they should have been allowed. But then Krishna walks in, and then he becomes a great mediator. And by talking to the sages and giving them his darshan and glorifying the devotees, it put the sages under great perplexity, because they're thinking, well, it seems like the Lord is taking the responsibility and supporting us, but by glorifying the devotees, he's really, it's creating a lot of, regret in us, because they were feeling very regretful, and they felt they need punishment from the Lord instead of praise. And very soon their hearts changed, and they realized that we should not have cursed these great sages. Why? Because devotees who are 100% involved in Krishna's service, even if they make a mistake, they're considered to be sadhus, and they should not be cursed upon. Right? Then we reflected on the other side that if devotees do curse or get angry with you, then how does a devotee take it? That reflected in the character of Jay and Vijay. They took this curse upon their heads, and they surrendered, and they prayed to them to protect them from forgetfulness of Krishna. You see, so many aspects are there. How the sages realized their mistake through the wonderful intervention of the Lord, but at the same time, how Krishna glorified them. So you can see, and when we do with the children, they get really completely amazed, because they think, wow, these are so many layers. And sometimes they shake their head. If you're there physically with them, they shake their head. Wow, my brain is going to explode. This is really so much. But they love it, and it all comes out in the end when you have them give their realizations. They become so happy because they get to share with everybody what they feel. They feel so needed and happy and wanted and so important. And also they feel very close to Krishna, because suddenly they've Krishna's qualities and the devotees' qualities have actually taken birth in their hearts, and they feel very, very refreshed and happy. I know children who, they hear Srimad Bhagavatam, and then they want another class, and they want another class. Like, they become eager, their hearts become attracted, all because of this process of discussion and opening their minds to the absolute truth, to a wonderful world that they have suddenly discovered. There's so many things out there to discover for people, right? And all that discovery comes through so many books, right? The creation, Lord's creation, is just so much full of variety. But when we go deep into this Srimad Bhagavatam, it's endless. It's a bottomless pit. Actually, never stops. This need for further inquiry, and this is what the process of Srimad Bhagavatam does. Is that it helps develop the process of this mode of inquiry in our children, so that and critical thinking, so that in the world, when they go out in the world one day, they will not take anything blindly, because you've already developed in them these skills of critical thinking, and they're going to take things and think about it and try to reason and think, no, but, and they're going to remember these conclusions in the Srimad Bhagavatam and these stories and use it in their life. So now I'm going to share with you how to teach Bhagavatam with children of different ages. And these toddlers, actually they could be all the way from 4 till 4 years old. We can, when children don't know actually how to read, then we can show them pictures from Bhagavatam book. I remember in my days, we had this set of Bhagavatam, which had many volumes. Now that reduced into fewer volumes. So when we had many books with many volumes, the set with many volumes, then we had a lot more pictures. And then we would go through these pictures with the very little ones when they were very young. And as they got older, then we could actually read the translations to them. And while we're reading, we kind of explain what's happening and also create a very interesting, imaginative picture for them. In other words, for a 4-year-old or between 4 and 5, we can still read directly from Srila Prabhupada's books and just create a wonderful image for them and explain everything. I remember doing that with one 4-year-old child, and she sat with me like for 45 minutes, hearing that, hearing the translations and being very, very fascinating as I told her what it all said and discussed with her and challenged her. So even a small child, like a 4-year-old or 3-year-old, can actually sit through a little bit. But for the younger ones, we can show them pictures. And there's no harm in coming back to these pictures again and again, because children love repetition. So we show them the peacock feather, we show them the cows, we tell them the story. We shouldn't think, oh, this can wait. We shouldn't be hesitant to do that, because Krishna is absolute. So when we hear about him, it goes deep into the heart. So here there's a group in London called the Baby Bhagavatam group. They made this group some years ago, and every week they get together and they do one chapter from the Bhagavatam with their children, and they try to make it very imaginative and very creative, and this way it attracts them. So they started out with Canto 1, Chapter 1, and I have this very short audio of Vinda Kishori, who's very, very creative and very, very wonderful, and she has made audios like that for every chapter of the Bhagavatam.
Oh my goodness, where are we? Can you hear that, Lally? Where are we?
We're in the forest, Naimisharanya.
The forest of Naimisharanya. Oh wow, it's so beautiful here. What can you see?
Chirping birds.
I can see chirping birds.
And loads of trees.
Loads of trees, yes. And look, Lally, can you see? There's so many sages.
And the street of good family.
Yes, you're right.
There he is.
There he is, yes. Oh my gosh, there's many great sages. They've all gathered together to perform a sacrifice for 1,000 years, just because they want to please
Lord Krishna and his devotees.
Yes, they want to please Lord Krishna and his devotees. And who did you say was the leader? Where's the leader?
Sita Goswami over there.
Oh yes, he's over there. Hare Krishna, Sita Goswami.
Hare Krishna, Sita Goswami.
Oh my goodness. The other sages, they're very respectful towards him. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I wonder why. Why are they so respectful towards him?
Because he's the tallest.
Or the oldest?
Oldest, I think.
Oh, I see.
And he knows all the scriptures.
Really? Wow. So he's the oldest out of all the sages, and he knows all the scriptures in all the world.
And he always listened to his spiritual master, so his spiritual master blessed him.
Oh, right. I see. Because he was very good and he listened to his spiritual master. His spiritual master was very pleased with him. His teacher was very pleased, and he lifted up his right hand and he blessed Sutta Goswami. And you know what?
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. It's done in a very creative way. So we can do similar things. We may not be very adept at doing this, but just to give you an idea that how you can make it very interesting for them so that they can digest it easily.
Somebody else that we're forgetting. Who is it?
Sorry. So this is a little bit older children, 4 to 8, and here the children, they can take turns reading translations, and it's amazing how much they can understand. Sometimes we think that young children cannot take in a lot, but I have many, many such experiences with children of that age where they shock me, they amaze me how much deep they can go, and how they can compare and remember things from a while ago and how they can bring it together. I want to tell you the story of my grandson that I was doing one time, stories with him on Skype, Srimad Bhagavatam with him, and we were doing this story of Dhruv Maharaj, where the airplane came to take him, and it's a fascinating description of what the airplane looks like and these beautiful personalities who had come, and he became very attracted, and he said, "I want to go back to Godhead on that plane right now, Dadi." And I thought, oh, well, he's just very inspired. And I said, okay, let's go on. And one day you can go. And he said, no, but I want to go now. And so I asked him, I said, you sure? If you want to go now, then your mother and father cannot go with you. You'll have to go alone. And he thought about it for a little while. And he said, well, I'm going to wait, because I'm going to not make the same mistake that Ajamal did. And the story of Ajamal we did some time ago, and how, you know, the story of how later on when he came to the right path, you know, then he was regretting about how he had neglected his poor parents, you know, and how he had fallen away. And due to that, he had left his chaste wife and neglected his poor parents. And he remembered that. And that was a while ago, right? So children really amaze you with, and again, that quality, how deep it went, you know, that quality that I talked to you earlier about the gratefulness quality. It went very deep for him to actually think of that story and bring it together, right? I know another mother was talking about her experience of how one time, you know, when she was doing the Dhruva story, then how there were some children who were not being nice to her child, and how she was feeling like, oh, I can't hate that person. I cannot give it back to that person, to that child, or become envious, because after all, this is what Suniti told Dhruva Maharaj, her son, that the way to deal with something like that, envy, is not to retaliate or not to hate that person, but rather go to Krishna. And she came back to her mother saying these things. So, I mean, many people have this experience. Children that age, they can make comparisons. They can question, you know, for example, I remember one child was asking when we were doing the story of Bali Maharaj, you know, how Bali Maharaj, Vaman Dev, he covered the entire universe. And everybody, Bali Maharaj saw himself under that, within that covering. And then he remembered, oh, this was just like when, you know, Yashoda, when Krishna opened his mouth, Yashoda saw herself in it. You know, Yashoda also saw herself in Krishna's mouth, you know. So in other words, he brought the two together, and he made that comparison, right? And this question of, you know, who's a devotee, who's a demon, comes, you know, in the story of Bali Maharaj and the story of Vritasura, also, you know, helps them to understand, okay, well, we shouldn't be so quick in judging people and thinking they are not good or they're demons just by the way they look or by the way where they're born. Because look at these people, Bali Maharaj and Vritasura, they were even greater devotees than, you know, Vritasura was a greater devotee than Indra. So it helps them to really develop a very, a compassionate view and a very, open view of the world, and how not to judge others, and to, in fact, to see them with compassion if they are not quite there. You know, how to relate to, even among devotee communities, how to relate with from one devotee to another, even though he might not be up to standard, right? And how to treat them with respect, and not to quickly make conclusions for them. So many things we are teaching through these stories to them, which would practically be impossible to teach, right? So this is the older children that I've already mentioned to you quite a bit about how we can go so very deep. But the point here, just the one point that I want to make, is that questions, they become deeper. So it becomes more not what is happening, but rather not just the story plot line, but why and how. And for me, my experience has been this question of why and how even comes earlier, you know. Of course, we exercise it to the max here, but it comes much, much earlier, you know. Even children, like I said, even 3 and 4 year olds, they are ready for challenges and going really deep. Because what happens is, as you do Bhagavatam early from the beginning, then their capacity to understand and reason becomes deeper and deeper. You know, in fact, everything, you know, they create analogies, you know. It's so funny. They actually start creating analogies, right, in their life. They read analogies, but they make their own analogies in life as they're going on, right? And that was one thing that I didn't mention earlier, is how these strong reasoning and critical thinking skills develop so effortlessly through this, the analogies and metaphors and allegories that is the Bhagavatam is so full of them, right? The analogy of the difference between car, body and soul, as Prabhupada explains it, the difference between the car and the driver. It just makes it easier for children to understand very difficult concepts, very difficult concepts, you know, even if, because we are materially so conditioned that to understand even that we are the spirit soul, it's not easy, right? And so the analogy of the car and driver really drives home that point, you know. And then I remember doing another, like for children older, going through that analogy of, you know, this symptoms of ecstasy, you know, that is many, many times mentioned in the Bhagavatam, the pure devotees exhibiting and how this whole thing happens. So Prabhupada explains this with this example of the coconut, you know, how the coconut, you know, when it dries up, when it's broken from the tree and it dries up, it separates from the inner shell. And so when a devotee becomes mature, he is no longer conditioned with the body. He separates, you know, his body. He's not living anymore in the body. His body becomes spiritualized, just like the coconut. So you know, things like that is very. I remember the concept of death. You know, it was very difficult. You know, teaching the children because it's a heavy subject, and how Prabhupada so nicely describes that in that example of the cat when it's carrying the kitten versus the rat, right? How death becomes so easy. It becomes easy for the devotee because he knows Krishna is there for him and he is there for him. And so it's just like, even though death is fearsome, but yet it's like the punishment of the mother and father versus punishment by a tyrant, right? Or an enemy is very different. And so the children learn to even appreciate topics like that, right? And so many, I remember doing that in the third canto with them, and it was very tough because it's heavily talks about some very, very heavy topics, right? But then how we can present it in a way, you know, which makes it easier to them. That's the challenge. And for example, you know, we see, you know, stories that, you know, Kapil Muni talks about, you know, the hellish, for example, the hellish planets, right? And but then Prabhupada explains that how hell is simply meant for the sinful soul to get conditioned, you know, so that he can become a dog or whatever, you know. In other words, as humans, we cannot take the body of a dog because consciousness is of a human. But in order to go to a lower species, he has to develop that type of consciousness. So hell is simply to train him. So there's nothing to fear in the sense that it is a training ground. It is not fearful, in other words, for devotees, because we are not sinful, and therefore but it's meant for those if they develop that mentality. So in this way, we can explain to them, it's just you know, how Krishna made it. It's so scientifically, you know, just it's a matter of, you know, we get, you know, accordingly. Krishna is very kind. He has to give us that consciousness, right? So death, in this way, topics like that become easier, right? So like we see in the story, some stories, we see death heavily depicted, which becomes very difficult for the children. But yet we still see how death can be so sweet for Dhruv Maharaj, you know, how he went back in the spiritual plane. So there's so much of this contrast in the Bhagavatam. Yes, there are some topics very deep and heavy and difficult, but yet it balances itself with stories that totally is just the opposite. Yes, we have topics such as you know, the heavy result, the result of a Grahamedi life, you know, which Prahlad Maharaj talks about, right? But yet we have the beautiful aspect of a wonderful Grihastha life as also, right? So we should not be afraid of reading to them those verses, sharing with them realizations of a Grahamedi life, because there are examples. We can balance it with wonderful Grihastha life that we see in example after example, right? We see in the story of Prithu Maharaj and Archie. We see in the story of Kardamuni and Devahuti. These are great stories for household, you know, for children who are, you know, growing up, and they need to see, you know, because 99.9% of the children are going to become, you know, grihasthas, right? And we should not be shy. And especially with teenagers, it becomes very difficult, isn't it? Older children, how to open up with topics like these, not so easy, because they are difficult topics. And here we find Prabhupada, some sensitive topics, which is in today's world. If they're going to school, then they will bring back those impressions, right? But yet we should not hesitate to open up with our children and discuss those topics with them, because anything in the Bhagavatam is going to be very, very valuable to them, because it's put in the right perspective, isn't it? It's put in the right perspective. And it gives us, especially topics like the position of women and all these things are very delicate matters, but yet Bhagavatam puts it in such a good perspective and talks about both sides, how a man can be very, it's very difficult, how a man can be vulnerable, to the attraction of the woman, but then a woman is so vulnerable to the attractions as well, and is very susceptible to the to being taken advantage of by unscrupulous men. So in other words, there's always balance there, where we show them the danger of free mixing of the sexes. I openly, with my teenagers, I have a group with a couple groups with teenagers, children who are 11 to 16, 18, and they love it, and we openly talk about these topics, because like I said, these topics are put in such a wonderful perspective. Topics such as sex and violence, they're going to get that anyway with the internet and all that. There's no way of avoiding it, and if they don't hear it from Srimad Bhagavatam, they'll get it from those bad places, and you don't want them to get it. It's good for them to hear it from the Srimad Bhagavatam, because it's always put in a perspective. We learn that in material life, this is attraction between man and woman is always going to be there. It's a fact of life. It's a fact of life. It's not to be. It's not. But if it's put in the right way, if it's used in the right way for raising Krishna conscious children, then it becomes very pleasing to Krishna. So they learn the proper place of these things. And we have enough examples in the scriptures, right? We have the story of Diti and Kashyapa Muni, but yet we have the story of Daksha and all the Prajapatis and progenitors who produced wonderful children, right? So we have both to balance out. And this way we should not be hesitant. And I read all these, the whole thing and I still do with the children. And I've never had, in fact, it makes our relationship very close, and they learn how to open up. Many parents, they worry about the communication between their children and themselves. And this is a great way to open up. Not only just these topics, but anywhere, as we read Bhagavatam with our children or with our students, we actually become very close to them, because that's the nature of spiritual topics, especially from Srimad Bhagavatam. It really, it makes the relationship closer than any material, togetherness will make. And I have that experience with my own children. And I see that experience with many, many parents who come and tell me that ever since they started reading Bhagavatam with their children, they've become very close to each other. So.
Yes, we can become proud. And that was in this disease. He became very proud.
Okay. And so this is one last thing I can mention before we'll take questions. I don't know, are we on time, Radhika? Are we okay?
Doing fine. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So here this is one story which I thought is very nice with our children, especially if you're starting out Bhagavatam with them. It's a wonderful story to start with. I would recommend, if you haven't done Bhagavatam with your children as yet, to start with a story, with stories, rather than going back to Canto 1, Chapter 1, because it's very philosophical, and it's hard initially for children to develop that attraction. And so when you start with a story, it's very deep and there's a lot of philosophy, but it's presented in a way that it becomes easier for them. And as they gain attraction, you can go back to the beginning. So in this story, as we know, that many, many points here that come up. Just quickly, I want to share with you some of the things that was expressed, that Suniti showed, was how, like I mentioned earlier, not to give pain to others. Of course, she was telling her son how she must not be envious. And then some other things that highlighted about her behavior was go to Krishna, don't go to the demigods, and how she changed an unfortunate situation into a very fortunate situation. And that went really deep with the children, I remember, because there's so many things that children face. We think children don't have their own anxieties. They have so much anxiety. And how to teach them to change that anxiety-filled situation into something, to see it as the mercy of the Lord, to see it as a very fortunate situation, is very much shown here in Suniti's example, how she took something very, very unfortunate and made it so fortunate by turning towards Krishna, by her chastity to Krishna, right? Basically, because both son and mother, they never forgot Krishna. Through all that hardship and misery, they took shelter of Krishna, right? And then we went deeper and we talked about how, Suruchi got a heavy reaction, but the king didn't get any heavy reaction, right? And why did the king not get such a heavy reaction, but the queen did? And then it gave us an opportunity to talk about, Suruchi was very, very cruel and harsh, and she made a very big offense. And so in the process, she suffered a reaction. She died, and her son, he was also consumed by the fire. But his father, Uttanapad, was very, very sorry for that he was very sorry for his mistake. And he was actually lamenting day and night. He actually left ruling his kingdom, and he was just meditating on Dhruva and what he had done and how he had given in to his queen, favorite queen, and how he didn't follow his religious principles of being a king also. So in that way, he was lamenting. So we talked about this concept of atoning, how to atone, how to say sorry, how we just do something and we just say sorry, and that's the end of it, right? And how to develop this quality of empathy, getting into that person's shoes and realizing what exactly we've done, how we've hurt that person and how to make amends for that. So we had a nice discussion on that. And so that's something. And then for the older children, we went really deep with Suniti's example, how she was neglected by her husband, but how she became so glorious. And ultimately, a person who's very faithful to Krishna becomes very glorious. So it's actually the chastity to Krishna is the ultimate principle. So our chastity to Krishna, the children learn, is the best chastity, how we can never forget him, and how a person who suffers so much in this world actually can become glorious just by their chastity to Krishna. And this is so nicely exemplified in the quality of Suniti. It shows that how one can make a very, very difficult situation into something so wonderful that she ultimately went back to Godhead just by being who she was. She didn't try to change her life or situation, but just being such an ideal devotee, she could go back to Godhead, and also having such a wonderful son. So this becomes a very encouraging factor that when we do our duties as a parent, then it's one of the most glorious service we can do because it's not small. We see this in the situation of Dhruv Maharaj, how she became a mother's service is so glorious, and a father's service is so glorious. So I think I should stop here and open it up for questions. If any of you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you so much, Mataji. That was just amazing. Very clear, very systematic, very inspiring. We have a lot of questions, but before we go there, I want to take the liberty to introduce your books, if you don't mind. And I want everyone to know that, oh, there, okay.
Sorry, I forgot to show that slide. Okay.
I want everyone to know that, Aruddha Mataji is, of course, not doing this, she's not trying to sell books here. That's not, anybody who knows her knows profit is not her motive. And I don't get any commission from her books being sold too. So I want you to know that I'm just sharing this from my heart because I have been trying to follow her method for a long time. And I have been discussing Bhagavatam with children for a long time. And I can speak from my experience that that these books are very, very helpful for any of us that want to use them with our own children or in group settings like Sunday school and all. I find the sweetness of the Srimad Bhagavatam, so we hear how Shukamukha, right? The parrot, the more it picks with its beak on the mango, it becomes sweeter and sweeter. So the same principle here, that when we teach children from these books, Srimad Bhagavatam for young readers, somehow the Bhagavatam becomes so much more sweet because it has been pablamized by Aruddha Mataji and it's been given to us for our children. The story summaries, the activities, the crafts, the discussion questions, so how do we as parents become equipped to ask these kind of questions? Like, how can I even these questions are not even coming to me, but because Aruddha Mataji has given a lot of discussion questions for every chapter, the more we do these books with our children, we learn to ask these kind of critical thinking questions and follow the tutorial method that she's talking about. So personally, my life has been transformed by using these books and discussing with children. So I wanted to put that in there because we are a very eager group of parents and educators here, and we're trying to reach Srimad Bhagavatam, and this is a very, very nice tool.
Thank you, Radhika. I just want to clarify one thing, that this is actually teamwork where we are several mothers and fathers around the world. They are helping in this process, and it's a collective enterprise. And every parent who's involved in this is expert in her or his own area. There are some who are English teachers. There are some who are computer professionals, some artists. And so they've put their talent and their lives, their heart into this. And many of them actually try it out even with their children before sending it. So it's a lot of hard work and a lot of inspiration there from many of these parents. So yes, and these books are, I would also specify that that this process that I gave you, the methodology of actually reading from Srila Prabhupada's books, is the foundation, how we should not skip this part. We should still read the translations with our children. And then once we've done that, if we finish the chapter, then we should go to these guidebooks. And because there's many activities here to help understand better that philosophy, and also to make it very fun for our children. For example, we have activities such as critical thinking activities, introspective, action activities, acting activities, analogy activities, art, language, character descriptions in some chapters, sometimes crossword puzzles, key messages for each chapter, giving us the key themes, which really is very helpful. And of course, some fun games and things. So in this way, you can pick out which chapters. It's not necessary to do every one of the activities, but wherever the child, you think would be very interesting for the child, you can pick those things. And these books can be used for anyone, like between the ages of 6 all the way to 16, or even older. There are some parents and teachers who are using it for themselves, also. So in whatever way, this is just like a humble attempt for, with all these parents from our side to make Srimad Bhagavatam more digestible and accessible to everyone out there. Thank you.
And we have a question here, how to order these books. Devotees, they're available on Amazon.com. So they're really easy to order. If you just search for Aruddha Devi Dasi on Amazon, all her books show up, and I've ordered from there, and the price is very reasonable, and they arrive in good time. All right, we're going to move on to some of our other questions. So the first question here, Mataji, is, I read Srimad Bhagavatam every day for 30 to 45 minutes with my child, but even I don't understand everything. Is it okay for me to read with my child?
Yes, when I started doing studying Bhagavatam with my children, I read it for the first time with them, and it was still, Bhagavatam is so potent. No matter how you approach it, it's very, it can be very good for the children, because we have, like I said earlier, we have life's experiences, that we children don't have. And so we'll always come out to be a lot more knowledgeable than the children, and it will benefit them. No matter if you cannot go very deep because we haven't read the purports, it's okay. But if you can read for yourself, the purpose, then it will help you also in terms of understanding it better. But this Bhagavatam is really understood in layers. It's not possible to understand all in one go, because it's ever fresh, and there's deeper and deeper meaning. Lord Chaitanya read these stories, heard these stories hundreds of times. And each time and the reason why it's said, why he heard this so many times, is because each time he said, when he read it, there were fresher meanings, newer and newer lessons. And so one never gets tired. Okay. So it's okay to just have one layer of it at a time. Okay. Thank you.
A mother is asking that when she reads with her 9-year-old and says that Srimad Bhagavatam has all the solutions, he asks, 1 + 1 is how much? Does the Bhagavatam have these kind of solutions? How do I convince him?
Oh, so Bhagavatam is not about these, subjects, even though this is all in the Vedas per se. Any knowledge that we see out there has to be a part of the Vedas, and so it's still within the Vedas, but yet Srimad Bhagavatam is like is like the ripened fruit, right? So in other words, the essence, the real meaning of Srimad Bhagavatam is to understand our real purpose in life, who we are, who Krishna is, what is the nature of this material world, and what is the purpose of this material life, and our business is to use the purpose for which it was created, right? So you explain to the child how for that, this is why unless we understand, I explained to you how unless we understand the source, we can understand all the parts, but it's never going to give us satisfaction. So this is one book where we understanding the source, and the rest is all there. We have so many other subjects that we can go to for other types of knowledge, other books. So
few questions about what language to read Srimad Bhagavatam in. Do you recommend English or one's mother tongue language?
Well, if you have the Srimad Bhagavatam in your own language, you could read that. If it's very hard for you, if the English language is very hard for you to understand, you're struggling yourself with it, then you could do that. Otherwise, I would recommend the English translation, because especially if they're living in America, then why not? Because if they are preachers and they, it helps them access that, knowledge in that language that Prabhupada wrote in, it's just, that's what I feel. But obviously Bhagavatam can be studied in any language, and that facility is there, so.
A mother asks, I have 2 children that are 8 and 16 years old. They are not interested in chanting or reading. How to make them read Srimad Bhagavatam?
Yes. Well, like I said earlier, you should start with a story. And if you just sit down with them, initially it feels very hard to get them to sit down. It depends, especially being 8 and 16, they are not very young. So we try to get them to, sit with us, and we make it really fun by discussing the story. Like I said, Dhruv Maharaj. And as soon as you get them speaking and sharing their realization and initiating questions, of their own, and giving them great applause as they come out with a realization, encouraging them at every step, then they will develop an attraction. So once you start the process, generally the process keeps moving, because the nature of Bhagavatam, it attracts the soul. So yes, it is hard in the beginning, but once you do it, it can be done. Or maybe it can be done in a group initially, maybe a group that may be there where you can discuss it, get them to join with a group of children to develop that attraction, And regarding chanting, chanting is one of difficult things to get children to do, inspire them. But yet, I think the best way to encourage them to chant is you chant with them, because the children feel more inspired. They see their mother or father chanting with them as a family, then they feel more encouraged to chant. And also they don't develop bad habits. We shouldn't use chanting as a form of punishment or reward, telling them, okay, if you don't do this, you'll have to chant 1 round today. So it's giving that impression that, chanting is something negative, right? So using it as a form of punishment or forcing them to chant. It's important that we don't force them to chant. Instead, they should see through example how wonderful it is to chant. And we should not also use it like a reward. If you chant 2 rounds, I'll give you an ice cream today. Again, we have to develop their faith in them that chanting itself is so wonderful. It helps us to get closer to Krishna. I remember when my children were young, I would, tell them that how Krishna dances on your tongue when you chant, and they used to like that. And we can develop all kinds of things. And we can chant as a group. Children like to chant in a group, chant with other children or with other adults, so they feel more encouraged to chant.
There are a few questions here that have a similar theme.
Mm-hmm.
Address this to some extent, but perhaps you can share something else. In your other classes, I've heard you refer to these as adult topics in the Bhagavatam. So we have a father of a 9-year-old girl that is asking, father-child relationship is not depicted in good light in the Bhagavatam. For instance, Brahma attracted to his daughter. There's also Hiranyakashipu, Daksha, Yayati, Dashrath banished Ram to the forest. How do I, as a father, present these topics to my 9-year-old daughter? And then another mother asks about topics from Ajamila, Prachini Barishad, how to discuss these because I'm uncomfortable as a parent.
Yes. So topics such, I remember coming across that verse where Brahma ran after, his daughter, and it is a little difficult, but yet I remember that, basically the whole point is that to understand is that, first of all, that was something that was not meant for a higher reason. Krishna was trying to show through that example that how even somebody like Brahma could actually fall down, so that point is there. But yet we are trying to do and make them understand that the whole basis of this material life and how it becomes degraded is this illegal connection, the unauthorized connection between man and woman. But yet the attraction is there, right? The attraction. So the whole material life is based on this principle of attraction between the opposite sexes. And these things can be it can be always there for any situation in life, right? And this is something that we have to protect from. One thing that you can do is also, when we have topics like that, unless the child asks, we go past it. We don't have to sit and make a big discussion from it. So many topics like that, which are very difficult, I would just read through it. And the child gets that after reading Bhagavatam, the child understands that there are some topics that are just not discussed. And the child is quite innocent in the sense that he's not thinking of so deeply about those topics, the details of those topics. For example, the details of sex life, it never enters his mind. But also, he also gets the understanding that there are some topics that my parent is not going to just discuss with me, and he just moves on. So again, we learn the art, how to just move on, right, without explaining everything in detail, right? For example, you're asking about the father and son relationship as depicted by Hiranyakashipu. Well, I explained all that in material life, anybody who's envious of God, it can manifest in ways that are very close relationships as well. Because when one is envious of the Lord, then one can be envious of even one's own son, right? Or husband and wife, they can be envious of each other, right? So these qualities can be there if one is not a devotee, right? And sometimes it even may manifest in a devotee. Well, that's because we are not at that purified level. And then we have contrasts, we have wonderful son and father relationship in the Bhagavatam, which gives just the opposite impression. Rishabdev and his 100 sons, right? Ideal father. Then the story of, the Pandavas, right? And story of Arjuna and Abhimanyu, his relationship. I mean, they're ideal relationships also in Ramayana, right? Ideal relationships. So we have these contrasts to help our children with. And like I said earlier, the topic of, sex life is difficult, but yet we don't have to discuss any details, but we have enough information from the Bhagavatam, which helps the children understand that the basic principle is in material life is this attraction and how to use it properly in Krishna's service. And if we don't use it properly, it has one result. And we see that in the story of Puranjan and his wife. There's many description of lustful relationship between them, but yet the results were there. Both of them was suffered through time. And that's very clearly. And I remember I was doing that with a group of teenage children. And in the end, they told me when we were doing realization, we would do on every chapter. And in the end, when we had realization of the entire story, then they said, well, this is my favorite story in the whole Bhagavatam, they were telling me. I was so shocked because we were able to discuss it in the right perspective. That yes, Puranjan was lustful, and yet, we saw the results of that relationship, and how because of that he took birth as a woman, and that was another journey that he had to take, right? So yes, there's a lot of that, but yet it can be put in the right perspective for our children. We should not be shy of reading them just because there's a bad father. So is he going to think of every father like that? Not possible. Because the nature of Bhagavatam is so transcendental, just like violence, it's depicted there, right? So much violence, like we have gory details of Parashuram killing, right? And all the parts of the body floating in rivers of blood, right? And of course, 10th canto is full with how Krishna kills all the demons in very, very creative ways, right? Even Hiranyakashipu, how he plucks out his all his intestines and he wearing it there with a garland around his neck. No child is going to become violent just by reading that, because it's put in perspective. Who is killing? It's Krishna who's killing. Krishna is finding creative ways to kill his demons, right? Bakasura, he's tearing apart his beak. Agasura, he's suffocating him. But who's killing? It's Krishna who's killing. His devotees never have to worry. Mother Yashoda and Nand Maharaj never have to kill any demon, or even his cowherd boyfriends, right? It's Krishna who's killing. But what is the violence that we see today in TV and all these internet and all these things around us? That kind of violence is very, very detrimental. In video games, why? Because it's violence that is gratuitous, Who's killing, why they're killing, nobody knows. is only meant to kill for personal sense gratification. And when children are exposed to that kind of violence, they become violent. This is how they see life. The violence that is depicted in video games, for example, right? This is what's bad for them. The violence depicted in Srimad Bhagavatam can, the child may become really, playfully may want to have a bow and arrow game with his little brother, but that's, and you can take, especially with things on video, when we have Krishna videos, and they may see that and they want to imitate that. If you're reading that, I haven't, there won't be much of a violence, where they want to hurt somebody while playing. But maybe when they're watching Krishna conscious videos like that, they may have such feelings. So you can take you can use your judgment in that case, when you're watching Krishna conscious videos. If it's you feel that is creating a negative feeling in the children, where they're becoming very violent with their friends or something, then you can use your judgment in that. But in terms of reading Srimad Bhagavatam, that is put into perspective so well through puppets and through, putting in perspective of, Krishna consciousness is done so well that it never has that effect on children, And like I explained, how really gory details in the Bhagavatam, even then, those things don't affect children negatively. I remember in the story of Hiranyakashipu, we were reading about the soul and how the queens were crying over the dead body of their husband, and Yamaraj was coming to try to preach to them, and how the soul was hovering there, and it was really like difficult, like really gruesome, how the soul was not leaving that body. And then Prabhupada talks about, how the soul, the body is just, becomes stool and things like that. And they become very, difficult topics. But the way it's put in perspective is just so nice. And we found ourselves openly discussing about an attached soul, how he really suffers because he's so attached to the body, he doesn't want to leave the body. And he wants to stay around there as a ghost. So they get that picture. Okay, well, when an attached soul really suffers, but yet a non-attached soul, he doesn't suffer. And we have enough examples of that. To learn about material life and is gory details, it really doesn't affect the child in that way. He actually, because it's put in such a good perspective, it's really actually good for him, because the children really enjoyed that part, And there's a side in the children where they want to be, they want to fight and be violent, and they love horror. How they love horror movies. And that side is in all of us, And that side is, especially in children, is satisfied through these gory details. And they love it. They love the challenge and that horror, because it's put in a wonderful perspective. It's put in a very good perspective, So anyway, this is a long answer to that question, but
we have a few questions around reading Bhagavatam with children of different ages.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a mother who has a 7-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. And the 7-year-old daughter loves to read Bhagavatam. And then the 3-year-old child also comes with his Bhagavatam and he wants to hear too. But because of the age difference, the older one then loses interest. The little one cries to read. The older one wants philosophy. The little one can't understand. So how to handle this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if one thing, if the child is very, very disruptive, you may have to find another time, a separate time for the older kids to read Bhagavatam with them. But if the child is, is more sober, his nature may be a little more sober, and you can manage, then you can engage the child in something that takes care of his need for play, and his need for being active. And the way you can do it is you can give him a coloring book and he quietly colors over there, or you can give him a soft toy to play with, a toy that doesn't make too much noise, and he can move around. Also, and we learn the art of not getting distracted, because as long he learns the principle from you that he cannot make noise, okay? But yet, because his body demands are very strong, so he needs to move around, and he needs to do something with his hands, then you can try that route. It may work, it may not work, you can see, but if it works, you can find yourself a good 45 minutes where you're discussing with the older child some very deep things, in the Bhagavatam. But the nice thing about this is the younger child is listening. It's amazing. You'll be shocked. You think that the child is not paying attention. After all, he's playing with that toy, but yet he's hearing. And you'll see that that will happen because he'll speak something, he'll say something during the discussion, or you can ask him an answer to a question, and he'll be able to answer, and you'll be shocked, like, really, he was listening? I've had that experience, and you think so. This technique can be tried with with children of different ages if you can work it out. Otherwise, you'll have to find a separate time. A 3-year-old generally can be very disruptive, but you can try. I know a 4-year-old sometimes can do this, where he can be engaged separately, and the older one can listen, and they can. I did one group with different ages, and one was 5-year-old, and the oldest child was 10, and that really worked out. Keeping their attention in terms of discussing philosophy. Okay, that part where one wants to hear philosophy. Well, you have to make it. You have to pull the other child into it. In other words, while discussing philosophy, you have to make it simple enough for the younger child where he can feel a part of it, and when he gets the chance to speak something, then he feels more involved and he doesn't get bored. For example, we're doing the story of Hiranyakashipu, the king of demons, with these different age groups, and we were talking about how Hiranyakashipu had conquered all the elements and he'd become so cruel, and then we talked about how people they control all the the climate and different things that Krishna gives us, and how scientists are trying so hard to control those things. And I remember asking the younger child simple things, and then making it deeper, that topic deeper with the older child. So the younger child was feeling very involved in the discussion because he got to answer something. And the older child, we went really deep with these topics, about science and things like that. So you have to learn the art of how keeping everybody in attention. Any group that I do, there's always difference in ages. One child is 8 and the other child is sometimes 16. And I'm able to manage it in a way where, you can get everybody involved. You ask something from the younger one, so the child feels, but also somehow the nature of Bhagavatam is such, once you've done it over time, somehow the younger one also gets very interested. It takes a time, it's a process, and you may have to try different techniques of how to keep them engaged. So it's a process, it's a practice. Don't give up, just keep trying. And if it becomes very difficult, then just try to do it separately. Okay.
For a 6-year-old, would you typically split a story across multiple sessions? So we just read the translations, and then once the story ends, do we move on to discussion in subsequent sessions?
Okay, yeah, I would suggest discussing as you go, not reading through the story and then finding another time or after that time discussing it. The discussion should be done as we are reading it, because if you just read, then that'll become very cumbersome for the child. He's going to lose interest. We're just reading through it, right? And if you only do discussion without the reading, we don't get the potency from Prabhupada's books. The direct potency that we can get from reading directly from the book. So both has to be there. And the nice thing of stopping is it doesn't become too boring, where we stop and discuss, because And then we can use our judgment in terms of how fast we go or how slow we go. If you do too much discussion and it becomes too long, then children will quickly lose interest also. And if you go too fast, then we may not be able to really get their, critical thinking skills there and the interest level increased. So we have, generally I would take like in a chapter that's about average size, like about 30 verses or 40 verses, I would take like about an hour, because I would not stop at every verse. By the way, we can read a few verses and then we see, oh, this is a good place to stop and discuss. So and the rest we read, right? So we are stopping only at those places where we think there could be a really good discussion. And then, it would take me an hour to do a typical chapter of that size. Now, if this chapter has 72 verses, then I would take 2 turns. You get so, good with this that okay, this is about where I should stop, and you get a hunch, okay, this is where we stop. I think my child is getting too much for that child, And you could, with a very young child, and if you want to do more than once, yes, you could divide in the sense that I would say with a very small child, like a 4-year-old, you could do it in 2 times, But generally, it's best to do it in one go, for an older child, because, then there's other things to do that you can do with the child. So generally, I would take it like an hour, But of course, if you're homeschooling, you have more time, and and obviously you can go longer, Or even for a child who's going to school, it's nice if you read every day with the child, even if you can spare only half an hour. But daily reading has its own value. And if you cannot do daily reading, then do as many times as you can, 2 or 3 times. If you cannot do that, do just once a week. But I would not do at all. Try to do at least something, maybe on the weekends.
You touched upon this, Mataji, but we have a father of a teenager, a 14-year-old boy, who is chanting 16 rounds, but is not so interested in sitting with him and discussing Srimad Bhagavatam along with the younger daughter that is 10-year-old, who is very interested. So how to handle a teenager who might not be interested?
Like I said earlier, try to find different ways, make a shorter period of time, like just sit for half an hour with him, try to somehow encourage him to sit down and you begin, like I said, once they get a chance to speak and to share what they're feeling, their realization, it becomes very, very attractive for them. Because the problem with not doing Shastra with them is that, in my experience has been that unless we feed the intelligence, there may be the other practices, which is very, very important to give this culture of Krishna consciousness to our children. But if the part is not there where their intelligence is satisfied and their questions are answered, and they know the deeper reason of why they're doing what they're doing, then the faith can become shaky as they hit, as they investigate the world themselves, So giving them this deeper aspect of life where the questions can be answered is very, very valuable, because there's a lot of peer pressure there where the mind can get diverted. There's been many situations where children have been really chanting and doing well, but later on in their life, they have had problems, right? They fall away from their practices, and the parents wonder what went wrong. They tell me that it was going so well, and suddenly there's a change, where they go to the temple and they are standing way in the back instead of being out there in front, showing enthusiasm. Or we have cases where my children have so much fun, kirtan, they're in kirtaniyas, but yet there's no substance, they really don't, they don't really know the substance, and therefore they're not very firm devotees. Then they can see it. They just like to chant and do kirtan, but they actually they don't really want to be devotees in other aspects, where they just don't want to chant. And well, if he's chanting, it's really very amazing, but yet it has to be, the Shastic knowledge has to be there. So you can try different ways. Another way you can try is that you can take him to Mayapur and have him do Bhakti Shastri, some kind of, Shastic course, maybe a shorter version of it, where they do, in the association of devotees, he can actually develop that taste. I know one boy who did that. He was losing it, and he went to the Holy Dham, and with that, beautiful association of other devotees and the effect of Holy Dham, his heart changed. So you can try different things like that, because yes, he may miss a semester, but that's okay. This is the time when if you don't give them this, they may get very distracted later on, and we may lose them. So yeah. And of course, if you're homeschooling, it's just perfect. It just works out really well, because it doesn't matter when you go and when you school them. You can switch around. Or you can have maybe something in the temple, when we open up the temples, maybe a group together where the children are taking part in, in Shastic discussion with other children, with an adult. Bhakti Vrikshas can also become a great place where we can have our children get involved in Shastra, having a separate Shastra time for our children with an adults, teaching them the different ways.
There are a couple of questions that are similar. Should we read Srimad Bhagavatam from the beginning, one canto after another, or pick up stories for kids?
Mm-hmm. I mentioned that earlier, that if the child hasn't read Bhagavatam before and hasn't really developed attraction from Srila Prabhupada's books, that attraction in terms of going really deep, and then I would suggest doing the stories. Otherwise, if he's already developed that attraction, going from Canto 1, Chapter 1, and doing it right from the beginning, and making it very, very interesting and attractive, because those chapters can become very difficult. But you learn the art of how, because you know your child, and you know what is it, how to capture his interest. And so even topics like, which are difficult, very, very philosophical, can be put it in a way which makes it attractive for them, by putting it with examples and, maybe mind maps, and the guidebook gives examples and activities such as those. For example, in the first canto of Chapter 1, we have this Krishna as the absolute truth, the first verse. And there's an activity in the guidebook where you can make a mind map, putting in the center Krishna as the absolute truth, and the other bubbles, with all his qualities. So you can take, use of that and make it interesting, that topic interesting. But even in the first canto, immediately we see so many interesting things are happening, right? Vyasadev's lamentation and Narad Muni's story of how, as a child, immediately that comes. And then we have the story of the Pandavas, the Mahabharata section. It's so interesting, the first canto. So learn the ways of how to make it interesting by developing a taste in reading yourself, then the taste will be easy to give. And but if you cannot do it on your own, then do it with the children, right away, Okay.
We have a couple questions from families that are homeschooling. One family asks, how long should it take to complete the Bhagavatam for a homeschooler? At my speed, I'm finishing only one canto in a year.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's okay if you're finishing one canto in a year. There's nothing wrong with that, because even if we read 2 cantos in a whole lifetime, we have a good chance of going back to Godhead, because Prabhupada he put everything in the first 2 cantos because he wasn't sure how long he was going to live. And so he gave his full heart into those 2 cantos, in those puppets. And so if we cannot read all the cantos with our children, there's no loss in that. But it all depends. If your children are the way you're doing it, and children feel very enthusiastic, and they're every day they want to do the Bhagavatam with you, then you're doing everything right. If you see them, losing interest, then maybe you can change a little bit where you can go faster. Maybe you're getting too much into the, maybe you're discussing too much. But 1 canto per year, it doesn't look too bad, really. So it all depends on the children's interest, how you are able to cultivate that attraction in them. Mm-hmm.
Another homeschooling family asks, can I use Bhagavatam as supplementary with other curriculum? Because I'm not that much confident to use Bhagavatam as a sole thing in homeschooling.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, there's nothing wrong with that. To make it as a subject among all subjects, because if you're homeschooling, then you're giving the values to them, in a very practical way, by your own example, to the study of Srimad Bhagavatam and other Shastra, and you're doing the other academics, which you feel, if you're feeling very comfortable in that process, I don't see anything wrong with that. So, because you will make a difference in the children just by doing Bhagavatam with them every day, and and answering the questions, and leading a life which is very oriented to devotional life. The results will be there.
So that seems to be the end of our questions.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I synthesized the questions, and there were multiple questions on YouTube and Zoom that had similar themes, and I beg for your forgiveness if I didn't depict them properly. And I think I covered all the questions, but if I didn't, I apologize. And if you would like to send in a question to Vaishnava Academy, we can forward it on to Aruddha Mataji. She also shared her email, aruddha108@yahoo.com, or Vaishnava Academy's email is va.iskon@gmail.com, and we can try to satisfy. So thank you very much, all the Vaishnavas, for joining. We have received multiple comments here on Zoom and live chat that parents are feeling very enlivened, that this is really amazing. It's really been very, very helpful. Aruddha Mataji, I don't have words to say, to convey my gratitude. Thank you so much. As always, it's a pleasure to see you and to get to spend 2 hours with you. Aruddha Mataji is very busy. A lot of people approach her for webinars, and she's, working on Canto 4 for children, but yet you took out 2 hours for us. Thank you so much. It's been very enlivening for me personally, strengthening my conviction and making the process clearer for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. This was very special for me because I know so many devotees over there who I actually know them, and I've interacted with them in so many ways. Thank you for your attention. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.